August 21, 1942, deep in the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal, dawn rose not with birdsong, but with the heavy hiss of rain against palm fronds. The air was thick as soup, choked with rot, gun oil, and the sour sweetness of crushed ferns. Beneath the dripping canopy, men of Japan's 1st Yokosuka Special Naval Landing Force crept through the undergrowth, rifles slung high, bayonets fixed. They moved with the practiced confidence of soldiers who had conquered half of Asia. Against the Chinese, the British, even the Soviets, their night assaults had brought victory. Silence, stealth, and the razor edge of the bayonet, these were the tools of the Emperor's infantry. The Americans, they had been told, were soft, clumsy fighters who feared close combat. But as the blackness thinned to a grey-green mist, the stillness broke. From somewhere ahead came a single brutal concussion, a sound that tore through the jungle like the sky collapsing. Men dropped where they stood. The echo rolled over the ridge, bouncing through the trees, not the rattle of a machine gun nor the pop of a rifle, but a blast so deep it felt like the air itself had split. Survivors swore it was a thunderclap from hell. When the next report came, it was followed by screams and the dull thud of bodies hitting mud. Panic spread faster than command could stop it. The men fired blindly into the brush, their Arisaka rifles cracking in a wild, useless volley. When daylight came, the truth was worse than any superstition. Scouts sent forward found their comrades shredded at close range, uniforms torn open, bamboo splintered as if by small grenades. No shell craters, no mortar shrapnel, no clue of heavy weapon fire. Just the signs of something fired from the hip, close and devastating. The Type 99 rifle, so proud a symbol of the Imperial Infantry, was powerless in such tight jungle, its long barrel caught on vines, its bayonet turned useless in the chaos of 10-foot visibility. Word spread that the Americans had brought illegal weapons to the island, devices forbidden by the Geneva Convention. Officers repeated the rumor to stiffen resolve, but among the ranks it only deepened the dread. In truth, what they faced was not a forbidden horror, but a relic perfected for close slaughter, the Winchester M1897 trench gun. Designed in the last war to clear European trenches, it had returned to life in the Pacific, now wielded by U.S. Marines, who had learned that in the jungle, the fight came at 5 yards, not 50. Firing 12-gauge buckshot, 9 lead pellets spreading wide from each shell, it could turn a dense thicket into a killing zone. In the night, a single Marine with a shotgun could erase a charging squad before they even saw him. To the Japanese, whose doctrine prized the silent bayonet rush, it was beyond comprehension that one man could deliver such carnage without artillery support. Patrol reports began describing bursting fire that left no single wound untouched. Men refused to advance after dusk, muttering that the Americans were armed with weapons that shattered the very air. Fear crept into the heart of their confidence. The jungle, once their ally, now seemed alive with hidden thunder. That night on Guadalcanal marked more than a skirmish. It was the first time Imperial troops faced a weapon that could defy their doctrine itself. The M1897 did not just kill. It changed the tempo of battle. And as the campaign spread across the Pacific, from the ridges of New Georgia to the cane fields of Leyte, that same sound, the hollow roar of the trench gun, would follow them, reshaping the myth of jungle warfare forever. December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. As the rising sun burned over Oahu's smoldering oil slicks, the Japanese Empire's war machine thundered into motion across half the globe. Within weeks, Imperial troops were storming ashore in Malaya, the Philippines, and the Dutch East Indies. The old empires of Europe were reeling. The Pacific was suddenly a Japanese lake. But beneath the palm fronds and mangrove swamps, the war took on a new character. This was no place for parades of tanks or long, elegant rifle volleys. It was a world of dripping heat, crawling humidity, and sightlines no longer than a few paces. The jungle muffled sound, swallowed visibility, and turned every encounter into a heartbeat's gamble. Japanese infantry had been trained for precisely such conditions. Their doctrine, born from years of fighting in China and Manchuria, emphasized infiltration, stealth, and the sudden shock of the bayonet charge. In the choking dark, they moved like ghosts, small units cutting through underbrush to strike before dawn, shouting "Banzai!" As they rushed forward, for a time it worked. The Allied troops, British, Dutch, Filipino, were caught off guard by an enemy that preferred to stab rather than shoot. Yet the Americans, when their turn came, were not so easily broken. The U.S. Marines and Army infantrymen, many of them hunters and policemen in peacetime, quickly recognized the futility of relying on long rifles in a place where a man could vanish 3 yards away. They began asking for weapons that matched the terrain, guns that could strike hard and wide at the distance of a room. The answer came from the past, the shotgun. The Winchester Model 1897 and its sleeker successor, the Model 1912, both veterans of the First World War's trenches, were pulled from armories and reissued. Each carried 6 shells of double-aught buckshot, each pull of the trigger sending 9 lead pellets into a man-sized cone of death at 30 yards. Short-barreled and quick to cycle, they were as practical in the jungle as a machete. By mid-1942, as supply ships unloaded crates of garans and bars on Guadalcanal's beaches, there were also smaller boxes, stenciled 12-gauge buckshot. They looked almost civilian, an afterthought among the rifles and mortars. Yet within weeks, those unassuming guns would earn a reputation out of proportion to their size. They would redefine the meaning of close combat, proving that in the Pacific, survival belonged not to the marksman at distance, but to the man who could kill at arm's length. In the humid chaos of the Pacific jungle, few sounds carried such authority as the metallic rack of a pump shotgun. The Winchester M1897 trench gun, born from the genius of John Moses Browning in the late 19th century, was not a new invention, it was a resurrection. Designed originally for police and sporting use, its military variant had already carved a grim legend in the mud of the First World War's trenches. By 1942 it returned to service, this time destined for a different kind of trench, the dripping, claustrophobic tunnels of the South Pacific. The weapon's anatomy was simple, brutal, and perfect for close war. A pump-action 12-gauge with a 20-inch barrel, perforated heat shield, and bayonet lug. It looked compact, but radiated menace. Loaded with 2 3/4-inch shells packed with 9.33 caliber lead balls, each discharge was equivalent to unloading a cluster of miniature musket rounds in a single heartbeat. Within 25 meters, it did not merely wound, it erased. At 10 yards, the blast could tear through brush, bamboo, and bone with equal ease, scattering the fragments of both into the steaming air. What made the M1897 terrifying was its rhythm. A practiced Marine could fire, pump, and fire again in less than a second. It held 6 shells in its magazine, and thanks to its unique slam-fire design, where the shooter could hold down the trigger and simply rack the slide to discharge another round, it could produce a rolling thunder of overlapping blasts. In the jungle's tight confines, that meant a single man could unleash a storm of lead faster than an enemy platoon could react. The recoil bruised shoulders, the muzzle flash lit the dark, and the echo made even friendly troops pause. It was not a weapon of finesse, but of dominance. Marines came to call it the alley cleaner, a name carried over from urban police lore. In their hands it became the answer to the Japanese banzai charge, a weapon that could halt momentum with pure shock. While the Imperial Infantry relied on their bolt-action Type 38 and Type 99 Arisakas, weapons demanding careful aim and steady distance, the Americans embraced chaos. The shotgun's spread erased the need for precision. Its noise shattered morale as effectively as it did bodies. By late 1943, the M1897 and its smoother successor, the Model 1912, were being issued to scouts, engineers, and every Marine who expected to fight at breathing distance. In the shadowed canopies of the Pacific, the trench gun was not just a tool, it was the embodiment of American adaptability, the beast that turned the jungle itself into a weapon. August 7, 1942, dawn broke over the steaming green-black coastline of Guadalcanal as landing craft ground into the sand. The air smelled of diesel, salt, and fear. The men of the 1st Marine Division splashed ashore under the rising sun, their boots sinking into volcanic mud that seemed to breathe. They came for an unfinished airfield the Japanese had begun carving from the jungle, a patch of coral that would soon be called Henderson Field. What awaited them was not only the heat, the insects and the choking foliage, but a determined enemy who had never known defeat in the Pacific. For 2 weeks, the Marines dug in, sweating under monsoon skies while the jungle closed in around them. That night, The trees came alive with whispers, the brush snapping, the rustle of movement, a shouted order in Japanese carried by the wind. The Imperial Army believed in the power of the night. Their doctrine, refined in China, was to strike in darkness, overwhelm through shock, and shatter the enemy's morale before dawn. They called it the Gyokusai spirit, the noble death charge. The Americans called it suicide. On the night of August 21, 1942, at the Tenaru River, that spirit met its reckoning. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers of Colonel Ichiki's detachment surged through the palms, screaming "Banzai!" as they charged straight into the marine perimeter. Tracer fire stitched the darkness, machine guns raking the beach, but it was the shotguns in the forward foxholes that decided the night. From 15 yards, the M1897s thundered, each blast a short-range explosion that tore through ranks of men in an instant. The air filled with smoke, blood, and the metallic scent of spent shells. Marines pumped and fired without pause, the slam-fire rhythm merging into a continuous roar. By dawn, the Tenaru had become a river of the dead. Reports described the scene as a charred meat grinder, a place where bodies lay so dense that the water ran red. The few survivors staggered back through the mangroves, stunned into silence. Later, when Japanese officers interrogated them, they spoke of a weapon that fired multiple fragments in a single flash, something beyond their understanding. At first, headquarters dismissed the stories as hysteria, until medics examined the corpses and found wounds that looked like miniature shell bursts. After that night, the jungle itself seemed to change sides. Japanese patrols began avoiding the American lines, skirting clear of foxholes where shotguns had been reported. Guadalcanal had baptized the shotgun in Pacific blood. It was no longer just a tool, it was a legend, whispered in fear across every island campaign to come. By the closing months of 1942, Japanese intelligence officers stationed in Rabaul and Truk began to take note of a strange new weapon turning up in reports from Guadalcanal and New Guinea. Prisoner interrogations, captured diaries, and even bullet-riddled corpses all hinted at the same thing, a firearm unlike any they had faced before. The Americans, it seemed, were using what troops called a buckshot gun. At first, Tokyo's analysts dismissed the accounts as exaggeration born from panic. But as more field reports arrived, describing multiple small entry wounds and shredded vegetation around ambush sites, the picture grew clearer. The enemy had introduced a close-range terror that struck faster than any rifle or light machine gun. When Japanese propagandists caught wind of the weapon's effects, they acted swiftly to control the narrative. Tokyo radio broadcasts denounced it as a barbaric instrument unfit for civilized nations, claiming the United States was deploying criminal devices of mutilation. Newspapers across the empire repeated the charge, citing the 1899 Hague Convention's supposed prohibition on weapons causing unnecessary suffering. Within the Imperial Army, officers reassured their men that Japan would issue protests through diplomatic channels, an ironic gesture, given that the country had never ratified the treaty in question. In 1943, a formal complaint was indeed delivered via Switzerland, though Washington dismissed it outright, arguing that the conventions did not apply to close-quarter jungle fighting. The matter ended there, but the fear did not. On the front lines, soldiers gave the shotgun and its wielder a darker name: Oni, demons. Patrols spoke of Americans who could appear out of the darkness and, with a single thunderous blast, erase entire squads. Some swore the weapon was an automatic cannon or a magic gun. American troops, quick to exploit the myth, began deliberately cycling their shotguns at night, the metallic ch-chack of the pump echoing through the trees like a death sentence. It was enough to freeze entire patrols in place. By the middle of 1943, the sound itself had become a weapon, an invisible presence in the jungle, a warning that the next second might bring annihilation. 43. By the time monsoon rains turned islands to mud, U.S. ordnance had shifted from improvisation to deliberate supply. Recognizing what jungle veterans already knew, Winchester, Ithaca, Hand Remington converted thousands of civilian shotguns into hardened combat variants. Bayonet lugs, ventilated handguards, Parkerized finishes and shortened barrels became routine factory mods. Over 80,000 trench and riot guns were issued during the war, each matched to pallets of 12-gauge ammunition, optimized for the tropics, 0-0 buckshot for anti-personnel work, solid slugs for breaching bunkers and doors, and paper-cased rounds lacquered or waxed against humidity. The logistical math was simple and brutal. 12-gauge shells were compact, cheap to produce and required no exotic propellants, so quartermasters could shove them forward on the same cargo ships that carried rations and spare parts. Priority went to units that lived at point-blank distances from the enemy. Marine raiders clearing enemy camps, Seabees building and defending forward strips, and Army jungle detachments tasked with night ambush and bunker clearance. In theater after theater, the shotgun proved its worth where more delicate weapons failed. Semi-automatic gas systems clogged in mud, long rifles snagged on vines, but the pump gun kept cycling in rain and slime. Japanese logistics, by contrast, were stretched taut across thousands of ocean miles. Forward battalions often reported shortages of replacement bolts and rifle cartridges, even as American patrols accumulated boxes of buckshot. Field reports from Bougainville, Cape Gloucester, and later Leyte credited handfuls of trench guns with saving patrols during sudden infiltrations, and quartermaster lists began to reflect the shift from curiosity to doctrine. By mid-1943, the shotgun had moved from improvisation to institutional tool, simple to produce, easy to push forward, and valued as much for its psychological bluntness as for its lethality. Next, tactics update. In the sodden heart of New Guinea and along Bougainville's ash-black ridges, 1943-1944 became the proving ground for shotgun ambushcraft. In the Owen Stanley Range, visibility collapsed to mere meters. Finds blurred outlines, and the canopy swallowed sound so completely that men moved by touch and scent as much as sight. American point men began carrying trench guns as standard kit, knowing that a single short blast at point-blank range could stop a rush before it formed. During the Bougainville landings on November 1, 1943, Marine squads pushing inland encountered repeated probes and fanatical charges. Each time, the geometry of the jungle turned momentum into vulnerability. Where a rifle required a sight picture, a shotgun delivered a cone of lethal projectiles that turned closed-in fighting into a matter of inches. Survivors later described blasts that seemed to lift men off their feet, bodies collapsing like cut grass. War diaries from frontline units recorded episodes where one trench gun holder staved off entire small assaults, long enough for reinforcements to close the kill zone. Tactically, the adaptation was deliberate and fast. Squads adopted a new template. 2 shotgun men became common practice, one to clear the route ahead and a second to guard the rear, while riflemen formed overlapping arcs to finish any enemy who survived the first sweep. Patrol drill shifted from long-range scouting to creating controlled engagement funnels that forced attackers into the 20-yard envelopes where buckshot was decisive. Japanese responses, wider spacing, grenade barrages, or sudden frontal charges, often failed because the jungle funneled movement into predictable choke points and panic revealed hidden positions. The psychological payoff was enormous. Scouts who once relied on stealth began to fire early or to avoid certain approaches entirely, and the metallic click of a pump being cycled at night took on the character of a death knell. By early 1944, shotgun tactics were no longer improvisation, but doctrine in many Pacific units. Practiced, refined and institutionalized, turning the jungle into a brutal equalizer, where the closer weapon usually 1 October 1944. Later Gulf boiled with smoke and salt as American convoys pushed toward the Philippine coast. For the men coming ashore, many of them veterans of Guadalcanal and Bougainville, the jungle no longer held mystery. It was a known killer, and they came prepared to tame it. Shotgun men led the way. Scouts, engineers, and point troops carried the same short, brutal weapons that had broken the Japanese will 2 years earlier. In the cane fields and palm groves of Leyte, every rustle could mean an ambush, every hut a bunker. The M1897 and M1912 thrived here, their short barrels clearing doorways and trenches where rifles were clumsy. One blast could sweep a Nipa hut clean or turn a tunnel mouth into a death trap. At Bayonet Pass in early 1945, where the mountains funneled the Japanese 10th Division into desperate defensive pockets, American infantry advanced yard by yard. Shotguns led each breach, one man to fire, another to reload. Each doorway answered with a single devastating report. After the battle, Japanese survivors described men cut in half, the air thick with the metallic fog of powder and blood. War correspondents called the pass a laboratory of close death. The shotgun had become not just a tool, but an emblem of inevitability, the thunder weapon that erased the advantage of concealment. By now, the psychological toll was unmistakable. Intelligence officers recorded diary fragments from captured soldiers. "We cannot fight the thunder weapon. Even the air fears it." Rumors spread that the Americans used explosive shells, that no armor or spirit could stop them. Many troops abandoned positions at the mere sound of a shell being chambered in the dark. What had begun as fear on Guadalcanal had evolved into superstition, one that hollowed the Japanese fighting spirit across the archipelago. In the Philippines, the shotgun was not simply feared, it was believed to be unstoppable. By 1945, the shotgun was more than a weapon. It was a rumor, a sound, a living terror woven into the night air of the Pacific. Its mechanical design had become secondary to its psychological impact. American patrols had learned the value of fear as surely as they had learned marksmanship. In the darkness of foxholes and forward perimeters, Marines began to chamber rounds not just for readiness, but for intimidation. The sharp metallic click-clack of a pump being cycled carried far through the jungle, an unmistakable signature that something deadly was waiting. Men swore they could feel the silence that followed, the pause in enemy movement as unseen Japanese soldiers froze, listening. Officers began formalizing the tactic. Shotgun traps appeared in defensive plans, empty foxholes baited with the sound of a racking action, followed by sudden crossfire from hidden machine guns. It worked more often than it failed. Against opponents already weakened by hunger, malaria, and the slow realization of defeat, the effect was devastating. Reports from the 25th Infantry Division in Luzon described increased enemy hesitancy and premature firing during approach whenever shotguns were known to be deployed. The Japanese High Command recognized the phenomenon too late. Their doctrine still preached courage as a cure for fear, yet courage could not stop the imagination from amplifying a noise into death itself. For American troops, morale soared. The shotgun offered something few other weapons could: immediate sensory confirmation of dominance. Its recoil, its blast, its simplicity, all of it fed a feeling of control in a war otherwise ruled by chaos. The weapon was not impersonal like artillery or distant like naval guns. It was intimate, a face-to-face judgment rendered at 10 feet. By the time Okinawa burned, many Japanese units refused to close within its range, retreating rather than risk the thunder they could not see. The M1897 had proven that in modern war, terror itself could be engineered, and sometimes the loudest weapon was the one that didn't need to fire. By the final year of the Pacific War, the shotgun had graduated from improvised tool to codified doctrine. What had begun as a stopgap weapon for jungle patrols now appeared in official U.S. field manuals under sections dedicated to close-in engagement and built-up area combat. The Army and Marine Corps recognized that the Pacific had rewritten the rules of distance. Training depots from Camp Lejeune to Hawaii began teaching structured drills, how to alternate riflemen and shotgunners in staggered formation, how to clear confined paths, and how to coordinate overlapping fire zones where every 10 yards could decide survival. For engineers and assault teams, slug rounds replaced grenades when breaching huts and bunkers. One precise blast could shear a door hinge or neutralize a defender behind cover. Marines in the Philippines refined stack-clearing tactics, moving room to room in fluid order, an innovation that would later echo in Korea Hue City and the alleys of Fallujah decades on. The philosophy behind infantry combat had shifted as well. Where earlier wars exalted precision marksmanship, the Pacific proved that suppression and speed ruled the jungle. Combat became as much a hunt as a fight, an exchange measured not by range or accuracy, but by proximity and dominance. The M1897 and M1912, relics of another era, had become the instruments of modern close-quarters battle. Their presence blurred the line between soldier and predator. Captured Japanese officers later admitted the change with quiet awe. Your soldiers fought as if the jungle was their home. Ours became strangers there. It was a confession of adaptation's triumph. The Americans had turned environment into ally, fear into doctrine, and simplicity into supremacy. The old trench gun, crude in form yet perfect in purpose, had proven that in war, evolution belongs not to the most advanced, but to the most adaptable. Despite its fearsome reputation, the shotgun arrived in the Pacific with limits no legend could erase. Its spread was a blessing in vine-choked ambushes and a liability on open ridges. Beyond 30 yards, its cone of buckshot simply lost meaning. Magazine capacity was modest. 6 shots could be gone in an instant, and reloading under fire or in mud was a dangerous, exposed chore. The theater's climate punished equipment. Paper-cased shells swelled in monsoon humidity, salt and grit ate at slides and rails, and pumps that worked in a dry armory could bind to a man's ruin on a rain-slick trail. Practicality met those problems head-on. Units waxed and lacquered shell cartons, taped bandoliers and soldered grease into creases to keep rounds feeding. Armorers parkerized exposed metal, smoothed rough edges that trapped mud, and fitted ventilated handguards to keep hands from slipping on wet stocks. Soldiers improvised waterproof pouches and wrapped stocks in canvas for grip and rot resistance. Some lightened civilian guns by trimming barrels or removing excess wood for easier carry through vines, trades that increased mobility but shortened service life. Training adapted too. Immediate action drills for a jammed pump, 2-man routines to cover a reload, and practice transitions between shotgun and rifle became standard in many jungle squads. Manufacturers and quartermasters responded where they could. Simpler pump designs with fewer parts and cleaner rails reduced the chance of a battlefield stoppage. Bottom eject configurations kept spent hulls from fouling an operator's face. Where supply allowed, brass-cased rounds replaced paper. Still, the shotgun never replaced rifles, machine guns, or mortars. Its strength was contextual, psychological and environmental more than ballistic. In the cramped, chaotic geometry of the Pacific, it was unrivaled. Elsewhere, its flaws mattered. That mixture of constraint and invention, fixes born of sweat and expedience, left a clear lesson about war. Adaptability, not elegance, often decides survival. Next, we trace how those lessons migrated from island fighting into post-war infantry doctrine. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the thunder of the trench gun faded, but its legend endured. Across the Pacific, veterans carried home not just medals but muscle memory, the feel of a pump sliding forward, the echo that froze unseen enemies. That familiarity soon found a civilian use. Police departments, facing post-war unrest and rising urban crime, adopted shortened riot guns, modeled directly on the M1897 and M1912. The men who once fought through cane fields and palm groves now patrolled American streets with the same instinct for close control and immediate deterrence. The U.S. military, too, refused to let the shotgun vanish. In Korea's frozen ravines, and later in Vietnam's steaming jungles, the same logic applied. Limited visibility, close quarters, and the need for overwhelming short-range power. The weapon evolved. Plastic shells replaced paper. Chrome-lined barrels resisted rust, and extended magazines gave soldiers more staying power in ambushes. Yet the essence remained unchanged: a man, a pump, and a thunderclap of authority. Historians later recognized the shotgun as one of the Pacific's unsung instruments of morale warfare. Its mechanical simplicity had shaped psychology as effectively as it had shaped battlefields. Japanese veterans, reflecting decades later, confessed that fear, not firepower, had undone them. One memoir called it the weapon that ended courage. Even 30 years on, jungle survivors could recall the metallic rhythm that signaled death. In the long lineage of military innovation, few weapons bridge centuries so effortlessly. From muddy foxholes to riot lines and counterinsurgency patrols, the shotgun proved a constant truth. Power in war is not only measured by range or caliber, but by the fear it commands. It redefined close combat not through invention, but through the enduring echo of terror made tangible. When the guns fell silent across the Pacific in August 1945, the jungles kept their memories. Beneath rotting palm leaves and tangled vines lay the relics of a savage lesson: rusted helmets, shattered bayonets, and empty shotgun shells half buried in the mud. The men who survived carried home something the earth could not reclaim: the sound that defined their war. The M1897 trench gun, crude by modern measure, had done more than kill. It had altered emotion itself, turning confidence into caution, courage into fear, and survival into instinct. For the Japanese infantry, its roar became a moment of reckoning, the instant when belief met reality and dissolved in thunder. For the Americans, it was the voice of control in a world ruled by chaos, a sound that meant power at arm's length. Each blast in the jungle was more than a shot. It was a message. The hunter had become the hunted. Decades have dulled the echoes, but the legacy remains. Every modern shotgun carried by police, every breaching weapon used by soldiers, still traces its lineage to those humid nights in the South Pacific. The M1897's report has long since faded into history, yet its meaning endures, a reminder that in war, destruction is not always the ultimate force. Sometimes the weapon that matters most is the one that shatters not the body but the will.